What if everything you thought you knew about rugby positions just became outdated? What if the future of the game isn't about playing your position better, but about not having a position at all?
Andre Esterhuizen is 19 centimeters tall and weighs 115 kilograms. For years, he's been one of the most destructive inside centers in world rugby. He breaks tackles, sets up his teammates, and operates in that crucial midfield channel where games are won and lost. But in June 2025, something unprecedented happened. The Springboks brought him off the bench against the Barbarians, and he packed down at flanker. Not as an emergency measure, not because of injuries. This was planned, trained for, and executed as a deliberate tactical choice. The question isn't just whether this works for Andre Esterhuizen. The question is whether this changes rugby forever. Let's be clear about what we're discussing here. This isn't a back covering the wing when someone gets hurt. Rassie Erasmus called him a hybrid player, a backline player who can also play in the forwards now. We're talking about a World Cup winning center, who now trains specifically to operate in the loose forwards. He doesn't just fill a gap, he competes at breakdowns, makes tackles in tight channels, and performs the technical duties that flankers spend their entire careers perfecting. Think about what that means for squad selection, game management, and tactical flexibility, but also think about what it means for the traditional structures that have defined rugby for over a century.
The timing of this development matters. Rugby has been moving toward greater athleticism and versatility for decades. Forwards are expected to handle like backs. Backs need to hit rucks and make dominant tackles. The modern game rewards players who can do more than their job description suggests. But there's a difference between being well-rounded and genuinely operating in two distinct positions. What Esterhuizen represents is the next level of that evolution. Or perhaps it's something entirely different. Perhaps it's a fundamental questioning of whether positions as we've understood them still make sense at the highest level. Esterhuizen himself expressed excitement about the role and said he looked forward to seeing how it develops. That perspective matters because he's not being forced into this, he's embracing it. For a player who's already achieved significant success in his primary position, that willingness to learn an entirely new craft shows either remarkable adaptability or recognition that this might genuinely be the direction the game is heading. The South African system has always valued innovation. They've produced players who redefine what's possible, but this feels different. This feels like they're not just finding better ways to play the existing game, they're asking whether the existing game still applies.
Let's examine the practical advantages. The Springboks have always been known for their powerful bench. They call it the bomb squad for a reason. Being able to bring on 6, sometimes 7, forwards to dominate the final quarter has been a cornerstone of their recent success. But benches are limited. You've got 8 substitutes to cover 15 positions. And the balance between backs and forwards creates constant selection headaches. If you can bring on someone who genuinely covers both a center position and a flanker role, you've just solved a problem that every coach in international rugby faces. You've created an extra spot. You've given yourself options that your opponent simply doesn't have.
But here's where it gets interesting. Does that advantage only work for teams with the depth and resources of South Africa? Or could this become a model that other nations, other clubs, start to copy? Imagine a scenario where having 1 or 2 hybrid players becomes standard, where squads are built around versatility rather than specialization, where the traditional idea of a tight forward, a loose forward, and a back becomes increasingly blurred.
The mental side might be even more demanding. How do you prepare during the week when you don't know whether you'll be packing down in the scrum or receiving a pass at inside center? How do you maintain the specific instincts required for each position when they're fundamentally different? Centers need to think about how to manipulate space and create opportunities. Flankers need to think about pressure, turnovers, and defensive organization. These thought processes don't naturally coexist. They're cultivated through thousands of repetitions until they become automatic. Training for both simultaneously seems almost contradictory. Yet here's a player doing exactly that. And not just attempting it, doing it at the highest level of the game.
There's a broader question about what this means for player development. If you're a young athlete coming through the system now, do you specialize early and become exceptional at one thing? Or do you develop multiple skill sets and bet on versatility becoming more valuable than expertise? For decades, the answer was obvious.
You picked your position, you worked on your craft, and you became the best version of that specific player you could be. But if international teams start selecting hybrid players, that calculation changes. Suddenly, the player who can cover 3 positions might be more valuable than the player who's marginally better at one. That's not necessarily good or bad, but it's different, and it fundamentally alters how the next generation approaches the game.
Erasmus mentioned Quagga Smith as an example of a forward who can cover wing. That's been part of their approach for years.
Backs pride themselves on their skill and creativity. Those identities aren't just labels, they shape how players see themselves and their role in the team. When you blur those lines, you risk losing something intangible but important. Or maybe you create something better. Maybe you build a team where everyone genuinely understands what their teammates are going through because they've trained for those roles themselves. That level of empathy and understanding could strengthen team cohesion in ways that traditional structures don't allow.
The commercial side deserves consideration too. Rugby is a global sport, but it's not the global sport. It competes for attention, for talent, and for resources.
Looking at other sports provides useful context. Basketball moved toward positionless play over the past decade. The traditional center, power forward, small forward, shooting guard, and point guard roles have become fluid. Teams prioritize skill and versatility over rigid position assignments. That evolution has generally been viewed as positive. The game became faster, more creative, and more entertaining. But basketball has 5 players on the court, not 15. The complexity of rugby, with its distinct phases of play and specialized units, makes direct comparisons difficult. Still, the principle holds. If you can get more production from fewer rigid categories, you probably should. The question is whether rugby's structure allows for that kind of flexibility without losing what makes the sport compelling.
But resilience comes with trade-offs. Time spent training a player for a second position is time not spent refining their primary position. Every minute Andre Esterhuizen spends learning breakdown technique is a minute he's not spending on passing accuracy or defensive line speed in the midfield. The assumption is that he's already good enough at his primary position, that the additional training doesn't compromise his effectiveness there. That might be true for a player of his experience and ability, but it might not be true for everyone. There's a real risk that in trying to create versatile players, you end up with players who are mediocre at multiple things rather than excellent at one. Managing that risk requires incredible coaching, incredible players, or both. The success or failure of this experiment won't be determined by one performance or one season. It'll be determined by whether other teams adopt similar strategies. If you see England, New Zealand, France, and other top nations developing their own hybrid players, you'll know the Springboks were onto something. If this remains a South African quirk that doesn't translate elsewhere, it'll be remembered as an interesting footnote rather than a turning point. Either outcome is possible. What's certain is that people are paying attention. Coaches around the world are watching Andre Esterhuizen pack down at flanker and asking themselves whether they should be doing something similar. That's how innovation spreads. One team tries something unconventional. If it works, everyone else follows. If it doesn't, everyone learns what not to do. Either way, the game moves forward.
Now, what does the future look like? If hybrid players become commonplace, you might see dramatically different squad compositions. You might see game plans built around players who can switch positions mid-match based on the tactical situation. You might see the traditional numbering system become obsolete as players operate in truly positionless structures. Or you might see teams realize that specialization still matters more than versatility and abandon the concept altogether. Both futures are plausible. The only certainty is that someone had to try it first. Andre Esterhuizen and the Springboks are trying it now. The rest of us get to watch and debate what it means.
This isn't just about one player or one team. It's about whether rugby's fundamental structure still serves the modern game. It's about whether the categories we've used for generations still make sense when athletes are faster, stronger, and more skilled than ever before. It's about whether coaches can find advantages in places no one thought to look. Most importantly, it's about whether the game can continue to evolve without losing what makes it special. Those are big questions. They don't have easy answers, but they're worth asking. And Andre Esterhuizen's experiment is forcing us to ask them. Whether you think this is brilliant innovation or necessary complication, you can't deny it's making people think differently about rugby. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real value isn't in whether the hybrid player model succeeds. Maybe it's in the conversations it starts and the questions it forces us to confront. Because those conversations and questions are what keep the game alive.
relevant, and constantly moving towards something better, or at least something different. And different, in a sport as traditional as rugby, might be exactly what we need right now.